The dusty saloon doors swung open, and James Holloway, the wealthiest rancher in Copper Ridge, stood frozen as he watched a poor saloon girl kneel beside his daughter. For 2 years, no one had been able to reach little Emma, not since the day she watched her mother die in that stagecoach accident. But tonight, something impossible happened. This stranger, this woman serving whiskey to drunken cowboys, spoke to Emma in a way that shattered every wall the child had built. And when Emma smiled for the first time in years, James knew his life was about to change forever. But what he didn't know was that this saloon girl was hiding a devastating secret, one that would nearly destroy them all before bringing them together in the most unexpected way. This is the story of how a wealthy rancher and a broken woman found redemption in each other, and how one little girl brought them both back to life. James Holloway pushed through the swinging doors of the Silver Spur Saloon, the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke hitting him immediately. Piano music jangled in the corner, competing with the rough laughter of ranch hands and drifters. This wasn't his kind of place, not anymore. He preferred the quiet of his ranch, the honest work of cattle and land. But tonight wasn't about him. Emma sat in the wooden wheelchair beside him, her small frame draped in a simple blue dress. Her father had it specially made by the seamstress in town, though Emma never seemed to notice such things. Her head was tilted downward, her dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. She hadn't looked up when they entered. She never did. A heavy-set bartender glanced their way, surprise flickering across his weathered face. James Holloway didn't frequent saloons, and everyone in Copper Ridge knew it. "Table in the back," James said, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Somewhere quiet." The bartender nodded, gesturing toward a corner table away from the noise. James guided Emma's wheelchair across the wooden floor, ignoring the curious stares from the other patrons. Let them wonder. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. As he settled into the chair across from Emma, James studied his daughter's face. She was 6 years old, but sometimes she seemed ancient, weighed down by something no child should carry. 2 years. 2 years since the stagecoach accident that had taken his wife, Rebecca. 2 years since Emma had watched her mother die in the dirt and dust of a mountain pass. Emma hadn't spoken a single word since that day. "Emma," James said gently, reaching across the table, "are you hungry, sweetheart?" Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. James exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He'd brought her here hoping a change of scenery might help. The ranch house felt like a tomb sometimes, filled with memories of Rebecca's laughter, her warmth. Maybe somewhere different, somewhere alive with people and noise, would reach through to wherever Emma had retreated. A young woman approached their table, notepad in hand. She had auburn hair pinned up loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. Her dress was simple but clean, the standard attire for saloon girls, though there was something different about her. Her hazel eyes held a wariness but also a gentleness that didn't quite fit the rough atmosphere of the Silver Spur. "Evening," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Name's Sarah. What can I get for you folks?" James barely glanced at her. "Whiskey for me. Some bread and stew for my daughter. Make sure it's not too hot." Sarah's gaze shifted to Emma, and James noticed her expression change, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Concern? Recognition? "She all right?" Sarah asked, her tone careful. James felt his shoulders tense. "She's fine. Just bring the food." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Be right back." When she returned minutes later, she placed the whiskey in front of James and the bowl of stew before Emma. The bread was torn into small pieces, easy to manage. James hadn't asked for that, but he noticed it anyway. He reached for the spoon, scooping up some of the cooled stew. "Come on, Emma. Just a few bites." Emma didn't move. Her small hands remained folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. James brought the spoon closer, but the moment it neared her lips, Emma's hand jerked up, knocking it away. Stew splattered across the table. A few heads turned their direction. James closed his eyes, frustration and heartbreak warring inside him. "Emma, please." "May I?" He looked up. Sarah was standing beside the table, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at him, though. She was looking at Emma. James frowned. "May you what?" Sarah gestured to the spoon. "May I try?" Every instinct told James to refuse. Emma wasn't some charity case, some spectacle for a saloon girl to practice her kindness on. He'd hired doctors, specialists, people who knew what they were doing. None of them had helped. But something in Sarah's eyes, something steady and certain, made him pause. Wordlessly, he handed her the spoon. Sarah knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl. She didn't immediately reach for the spoon or the bowl. Instead, she just sat there, her presence calm and unhurried. "Hello, Emma," Sarah said softly, as if they were old friends, meeting after a long time apart. Emma didn't respond, but Sarah didn't seem to expect her to. "You know," Sarah continued, her voice gentle and warm, "my mama used to make stew just like this. She'd say that every spoonful carried a little bit of home in it." She dipped the spoon into the bowl, lifting it slightly, but not forcing it forward. "Would you like to try just one spoonful, just to see if it tastes like home?" James watched, his breath caught somewhere in his chest. He'd seen countless people try to reach Emma, doctors with their clinical approaches, well-meaning neighbors with their pity, even Rebecca's sister with her desperate pleas. None of them had spoken to her like this, like she was still there, still listening. For a long moment, nothing happened. The saloon noise continued around them, laughter, clinking glasses, the off-key piano. But at their table, time seemed to hold its breath. Then Emma's fingers twitched. Sarah smiled, just barely. "That's right, sweetheart. Just one little taste." Slowly, carefully, she brought the spoon toward Emma's lips. And this time, Emma didn't pull away. The warm broth touched her mouth, and after a heartbeat, she swallowed. James felt something crack open in his chest. But then something even more impossible happened. Emma lifted her eyes, those dark eyes that hadn't really looked at anything in 2 years. And she looked at Sarah, really looked at her. And then, so faint James almost thought he'd imagined it, Emma smiled. The world tilted. James gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Emma hadn't smiled since before the accident, not once, not even in sleep. "How?" His voice came out hoarse. "How did you do that?" Sarah looked up at him, and for just a moment, he saw something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe. Or memory. "I just talked to her like she could hear me," she said simply. "Because she can." James stared at this woman, this saloon girl who'd just done what no one else could. "Who are you?" Sarah stood, brushing off her skirt. "Just someone who knows what it's like to care for someone who can't always show they're listening." She glanced back at Emma once more, something tender and broken in her expression. "Your daughter's still in there, Mr. Holloway. She's just lost right now." Before James could respond, Sarah turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of the saloon. James couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed at the ranch house, staring at the ceiling beams, replaying the moment over and over. Emma's smile, that tiny, fragile smile that had lit up her face for just a second. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He rode into town and went straight to see Marcus Webb, a former Pinkerton detective who now worked private cases for those who could afford him. James could afford him. "I need you to find out everything about a woman named Sarah," James said, sliding a stack of bills across the desk. "Sarah Bennett, works at the Silver Spur." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The saloon girl? I don't care what she does now. I need to know who she was before." It took Marcus 3 days. When he returned to the ranch, he carried a folder of documents and a grim expression. "You're not going to like this, Holloway," Marcus said, dropping the folder on James's desk. James opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, academic records, letters of recommendation. Sarah Bennett had attended a teaching college in Carson City. She'd been at the top of her class, specializing in children with developmental delays and trauma. Professors called her gifted, compassionate, extraordinary. Then, 2 years ago, she'd simply vanished. No graduation, no forwarding address, nothing. Until she turned up in Copper Ridge, serving whiskey to drunks. James looked up at Marcus. Why would someone walk away from all this? Marcus shook his head. That's the question, isn't it? But there's more. He pointed to a death notice tucked in the back of the folder. James pulled it out, and his stomach dropped. Caleb Bennett, age 8, died of scarlet fever. A brother. She'd lost a brother. James closed the folder slowly, his mind racing. Sarah Bennett hadn't just walked away from her future. She'd run from her past, and tomorrow he was going to find out why. The next evening, James returned to the Silver Spur. This time, he came alone. Sarah was wiping down tables near the back when she spotted him. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then something guarded. She straightened, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. James walked directly to her, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Emma's not with you tonight." "I need to talk to you," James said. "Somewhere private." Sarah glanced around the saloon. It was early yet, not many customers. She set down her rag and gestured toward the back door. "Outside. I've got 5 minutes before the evening rush." They stepped into the alley behind the saloon. The sun was setting, painting Copper Ridge in shades of orange and purple. Dust hung in the air, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Sarah crossed her arms, waiting. James didn't waste time. "You were incredible with Emma." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. "I just gave her some stew, Mr. Holloway. Nothing special." "Don't," James said, his voice firm. "Don't pretend it was nothing. I've had doctors, specialists, people who've studied this sort of thing for years try to reach her. None of them got through. You did it in 5 minutes." Sarah looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Sometimes children just need someone to treat them like they're still whole. "You've done this before," James continued, watching her carefully. "Haven't you?" Sarah's shoulders stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sarah Bennett," James said quietly. "Top of your class at Carson City Teaching College. Specialized in children with trauma and developmental delays. 3 professors wrote that you were the most naturally gifted student they'd ever seen." The color drained from Sarah's face. She turned to him sharply, anger flashing in her hazel eyes. "You investigated me?" "I had to know," James said. "I had to understand how you reached my daughter when no one else could." Sarah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "So you dug into my past like I'm some criminal?" "You walked away from everything," James pressed. 2 years ago, you just disappeared. No graduation, no explanation. And now you're here, serving whiskey in a saloon. Why? "That's none of your damn business," Sarah shot back, her voice hard. James stepped closer. "It is if you're the only person who can help Emma." Sarah's breath caught. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of anger and something else. Fear, maybe, or pain. "I want you to come work for me," James said, his voice softening slightly. "Be Emma's caregiver. Live at the ranch. I'll pay you more than you'd make in a year at this saloon. Whatever you need, it's yours." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Then she shook her head. "No." James frowned. "You haven't even heard my full offer." "I said no, Mr. Holloway." Her voice was firm now, final. "Why?" James demanded. "You're clearly qualified. You're wasting your talents here. And Emma responds to you." She smiled, Sarah. For the first time in 2 years, my daughter smiled. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, forcing the emotion back. "I can't. Can't or won't. Both." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold something in, I appreciate the offer, I do, but I'm not the person you think I am. James studied her, frustration building in his chest. Then who are you? Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm someone who walked away from that life for a reason, and I'm not going back, even if it means helping a little girl who needs you. The words hit their mark. Sarah flinched, pain flashing across her face, but when she spoke again, her voice was steady, resolute. Especially then, she whispered. James stared at her, trying to understand. There was something deeper here, something she wasn't telling him. Sarah, I have to get back to work, she cut him off, already turning toward the door. I'm sorry about Emma. I truly am, but find someone else, Mr. Holloway. I can't be what you need. And with that, she disappeared back into the saloon, leaving James standing alone in the alley, more confused and frustrated than ever. Whatever had made Sarah Bennett walk away from her calling, it still had its hooks in her, and James was determined to find out what it was. James didn't give up easily. It wasn't in his nature. He'd built his ranch from nothing, survived droughts and harsh winters, outlasted competitors who thought they could break him. A stubborn saloon girl with secrets wasn't going to stop him, not when his daughter's future hung in the balance. He went back to Marcus Webb. Dig deeper, James said, dropping another payment on the detective's desk. There's something she's not telling me. Something about her brother. Marcus sighed, but took the money. You're playing with fire, Holloway. Some secrets are buried for a reason. Then help me unbury this one. 2 days later, Marcus returned with a single telegram and a grim expression. James read it, standing up, his chest tightening with each line. Caleb Bennett, age 8, died at St. Mary's Hospital, Carson City. Cause, scarlet fever complications. Sister Sarah Bennett, present. Hospital records indicate delayed treatment. Child arrived too late for intervention. James set the telegram down slowly. The words, too late, echoed in his mind. She'd lost her brother because she hadn't gotten him help in time. That night, James went back to the Silver Spur. But this time, he waited. He sat at a corner table, nursing a whiskey he didn't want, watching Sarah move through her shift, serving drinks, deflecting unwanted attention from drunk cowboys, keeping her head down. When the saloon finally emptied near midnight, James stood. Sarah was collecting empty glasses when she noticed him. She froze. We're closed, Mr. Holloway, she said quietly. I know about Caleb, James said. The glass in Sarah's hand slipped, shattering on the floor. She stared at the broken pieces, her face pale. Get out, she whispered. Sarah, I said get out. Her voice cracked, raw with pain. James didn't move. I know he was your brother. I know he died of scarlet fever, and I know you think it was your fault. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. You don't know anything. Then tell me, James said, his voice gentler now. Tell me why you walked away from everything you worked for. Why you're hiding in this saloon instead of helping children who need you. Sarah's breath came faster, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a long moment, she just stood there, trembling. Then, finally, the dam broke. Because I killed him, she choked out. I killed my own brother. James's chest tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb was everything to me. Our parents died when I was 16, and I raised him. I was all he had. She laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was doing everything right. I was studying, learning how to help children like him. He had a weak constitution, always getting sick. I thought I knew what I was doing. Her voice broke. But that night, when the fever came, I thought it was just another cold. I thought I could handle it myself. I didn't want to waste money on a doctor for something that would pass. She looked up at James, her hazel eyes haunted. By the time I realized how bad it was, by the time I got him to the hospital, it was too late. He died in my arms, and the last thing he did was look at me like he trusted me to save him." Sarah's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I was supposed to be the one person who knew how to help him, and I failed. I let him die because I was too proud, too stubborn to ask for help sooner." James moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "Sarah, don't," she said sharply, jerking away. "Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. Don't tell me I did everything I could, because I didn't. I failed him, and I can't—" her voice cracked. "I can't fail another child. I won't survive it." James understood now. This wasn't just about walking away from her career. It was about protecting herself from the unbearable weight of caring and possibly losing again. "Is that why you won't help Emma?" James asked quietly. "Because you're afraid?" Sarah looked at him, tears still streaming down her face. "I'm not afraid, Mr. Holloway. I'm certain. If I let myself care about her, if I let myself try to help her and I fail—" She shook her head. "I can't bury another child I love." James's throat tightened. "So you'd rather let her suffer alone?" "I'd rather she have someone who won't destroy her," Sarah whispered. James stood slowly, his heart heavy. He understood her pain now, her fear, but understanding didn't change what Emma needed. "1 week," he said quietly. Sarah looked up, confused. "Give me 1 week," James continued. "Just try. If after 1 week you still can't do it, I'll leave you alone. But Emma deserves a chance, Sarah, and so do you." Sarah stared at him, conflict warring in her expression. Finally, in a voice so small he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "1 week, that's all." The Holloway Ranch was unlike anything Sarah had expected. Sprawling pastures stretched toward distant mountains. Cattle grazed peacefully under the wide Nevada sky, and the ranch house itself, though grand, had a worn, lived-in quality that spoke of family rather than fortune. James showed her to a small room on the second floor, simply furnished but clean. "You'll stay here," he said. "Emma's room is just down the hall." Sarah set down her single carpet bag, her stomach twisting with anxiety. 1 week, she reminded him. 1 week, James agreed. The first 2 days were harder than Sarah had anticipated. Emma sat in her wheelchair by the window of her room, staring out at nothing. Sarah tried reading to her, tried singing softly, tried simply sitting nearby. But Emma remained locked away, unreachable. Sarah felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down on her chest. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe she couldn't do this anymore. But on the third morning, something shifted. Sarah was brushing Emma's hair, humming quietly, a song her mother used to sing to Caleb when he was frightened. As the melody filled the room, she noticed Emma's fingers begin to move, tapping gently against the arm of her wheelchair. Sarah's breath caught. The tapping was rhythmic, matching the melody. "You hear it, don't you?" Sarah whispered, continuing to hum. "You hear the music." Emma didn't respond with words, but her fingers kept tapping, and Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. That evening, as Sarah helped Emma into bed, she began to sing the lullaby fully, her voice soft and trembling. "Hush, little darling, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby." It was the same song she'd sung to Caleb on his last night. She'd sworn she'd never sing it again, that the memories were too painful. But looking at Emma's small, fragile form, she couldn't help herself. Outside the door, James stood frozen in the hallway. He'd been walking past when he heard Sarah's voice, achingly beautiful and heartbreakingly sad. Through the crack in the door, he could see Emma's eyes beginning to close, her breathing evening out. For the first time in 2 years, his daughter was falling asleep peacefully, without nightmares, without fear. And it was because of Sarah. Over the following days, James found himself spending more time around Sarah and Emma. At first, he told himself he was just observing, making sure his investment in Sarah's help was worthwhile. But the truth was harder to admit. He was drawn to them, to the warmth Sarah brought into their home, to the way she spoke to Emma with such patience and love. One afternoon, Sarah was working with Emma on simple tasks, stacking wooden blocks, trying to encourage any kind of engagement. James sat nearby, and when Emma's hand trembled too much to place a block, he gently guided her fingers. Emma didn't pull away. She let him help. Sarah looked up, meeting James's eyes, and smiled. She's learning to trust again. James swallowed hard. Because of you. Because we're showing her she's safe, Sarah corrected gently. Later that evening, after Emma had been put to bed, Sarah and James sat on the front porch of the ranch house. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. The air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. She's getting better, James said quietly, watching the horizon. I can see it. Sarah nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She's finding her way back. It just takes time. James turned to look at her. You're good at this, Sarah. Better than anyone I've ever seen. You shouldn't have given it up. Sarah's expression clouded. I told you why I did. I know, James said softly. But maybe Caleb wouldn't want you to stop helping children because of what happened to him. Sarah's eyes glistened. Don't. I'm not trying to hurt you, James said, shifting closer. I just think you're punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. You don't understand. Then help me understand, James said, his voice urgent now. Help me understand why someone as talented, as compassionate as you, would throw it all away. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, James saw past her walls. He saw the guilt, the pain, but also something else. Loneliness. A desperate, aching loneliness that mirrored his own. Sarah, he whispered, and before either of them could think, before either could stop it, James leaned forward and kissed her. For a moment, Sarah froze. Then she melted into it, her hands gripping his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. The kiss was gentle but desperate, filled with all the grief and hope neither of them had words for. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Sarah's eyes were wide, frightened. James, we can't. Why not? James asked, his hand still cupping her cheek. Because, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking, I can't lose anyone else I care about. And with that, she stood abruptly and fled into the house, leaving James alone on the porch with the dying light and the echo of something that had almost been. Sarah barely slept that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of James's kiss on her lips. It had been a mistake, a beautiful, terrible mistake. She'd let herself get too close, let herself care too much. And caring meant risk. Risk meant loss. And she couldn't survive another loss. By morning, her decision was made. She found James in his study, going over ranch ledgers. He looked up when she entered, hope flickering in his eyes, hope that died the moment he saw her expression. I'm leaving, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. James stood slowly. Sarah, the week is over, she continued, not meeting his eyes. I've done what you asked. Emma's improving. You can find someone else to continue the work. There is no one else, James said, moving around the desk toward her. You know that. Sarah shook her head. There are plenty of qualified people. Write to Carson City. Hire a proper governess. Someone trained. Someone like you? James's voice was sharp now, frustrated. Someone who won't care about her the way you do. Someone who won't fail her, Sarah shot back. James stopped, his jaw tightening. Is this about last night? Because I kissed you? Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. This is about me knowing my limits, Mr. Holloway. I told you 1 week. The week is done. Emma needs you, James said, desperation creeping into his voice. She's finally coming back to us, and you're just going to abandon her? The words hit like a physical blow, but Sarah forced herself to stay firm. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm preventing something worse. What could be worse than leaving her now? James demanded. Sarah's control finally cracked. Me, staying and destroying her, her voice echoed in the study. Don't you understand? Everyone I try to save, I lose. My brother trusted me, and I let him die. If I stay, if I let myself love Emma the way I'm starting to," her voice broke. "When I fail her, and I will fail her, it will destroy us both." James stared at her, his expression hardening. "So that's it? You're just a coward?" Sarah flinched. "You'd rather run away than risk actually helping someone?" James continued, anger replacing the desperation. "You'd rather hide in that saloon, serving drinks and wasting your life, than face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you could make a difference. You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly," James said coldly. "You're not leaving to protect Emma. You're leaving to protect yourself." He stepped closer, his eyes hard. "You're just looking for someone to replace what you lost. Your brother. You see Caleb in every child, and you can't separate your guilt from actually helping them." The words were cruel, calculated to hurt, and they did. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. "Think what you want," she whispered, "but I'm leaving today." "Then get out," James said, his voice like ice. Sarah turned and walked away, each step feeling like she was tearing herself apart. She packed her carpet bag in minutes. She'd barely unpacked anyway, and headed for the door. As she passed Emma's room, she paused. The little girl was sitting by the window, and for a moment, Sarah considered saying goodbye, but she couldn't. If she looked at Emma one more time, she'd never leave. So she kept walking. Emma stopped eating 3 days after Sarah left. At first, James thought it was just a temporary setback. But then Emma stopped responding entirely, not even the small gestures she'd begun making with Sarah. She retreated back into herself, deeper than before. And this time, James couldn't reach her at all. He tried everything. He hired a governess from Carson City, but Emma wouldn't even look at her. He brought in a doctor who suggested force feeding, which James refused. He sat with Emma for hours, reading, talking, pleading. Nothing worked. By the end of the week, Emma had grown pale and weak. She barely slept. When she did, she woke screaming. Nightmares James couldn't soothe. It was like watching his daughter slip away all over again, and this time he was powerless to stop it. One night, as he sat beside Emma's bed, watching her fitful sleep, James finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He'd been wrong, so terribly wrong. He'd pushed Sarah away with his cruel words, and now Emma was paying the price. And James realized with crushing clarity that he hadn't just needed Sarah for Emma. He needed her for himself. He'd been alone for so long, drowning in grief and responsibility, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone truly see him. Sarah had seen him, his pain, his failures, his desperate love for his daughter, and he'd driven her away. James looked at Emma's pale face and made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find Sarah, and this time he wouldn't let pride or anger get in the way, because his daughter's life, and perhaps his own heart, depended on it. The Silver Spur was quieter than usual when James pushed through the doors, Emma cradled in his arms. The little girl was wrapped in a blanket, her head resting limply against his shoulder. She'd grown so thin in the past week that carrying her felt like holding a ghost. Several patrons looked up, surprise registering on their faces. James Holloway didn't come to saloons, and certainly not carrying his daughter like this. Sarah was behind the bar, polishing glasses. When she looked up and saw them, every bit of color drained from her face. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Sarah was running, pushing past tables, nearly tripping over a chair, until she reached them. Her hands trembled as they reached for Emma, hovering but not quite touching, as if she were afraid the child might disappear. "Emma," Sarah breathed, her voice cracking. "Oh God, Emma!" The little girl's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Sarah's voice. For a moment she just stared, as if trying to determine whether Sarah was real. Then, slowly, painfully, Emma lifted one small hand and touched Sarah's cheek. It was such a simple gesture, but it shattered something in Sarah. Tears spilled down her face as she pulled Emma from James's arms, holding her close, whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Emma's fingers curled into Sarah's dress, clinging to her like she'd never let go. James watched them, his throat tight. Around them, the saloon had gone completely silent. Even the piano player had stopped. Sarah looked up at James then, her hazel eyes swimming with tears and something else. Anguish, regret, hope all tangled together. What happened to her? James's jaw tightened. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The nightmares came back worse than before. His voice dropped. "She's been calling for you. In her sleep, she keeps reaching for you." Sarah closed her eyes, pressing her face against Emma's hair. "I shouldn't have left. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have said what I said," James interrupted, stepping closer. His voice was raw, stripped of all pride. "I was angry, and I was cruel, and I was wrong." Sarah shook her head, tears still streaming. "You were right. I was running. I was protecting myself instead of—" "No," James said firmly. He reached out, gently tilting her chin up so she had to look at him. "I was wrong, Sarah, about everything." He took a shaky breath. "You're not trying to replace what you lost. You're trying to honor it, and I threw that in your face because I was terrified." Sarah blinked. "Terrified of what?" James glanced around at the watching patrons, then back at Sarah. For once, he didn't care who heard. "Of needing you," he said quietly. "Of needing you so much that losing you would break me." Sarah's breath caught. James continued, his voice steady now, despite the emotion behind it. "When you left, I told myself it was about Emma, that I was angry because she needed you. But the truth is," he paused, gathering courage, "I need you, Sarah. Not just for my daughter, for me." Sarah stared at him, Emma still held tight in her arms. "I've been alone for 2 years," James said. "I've been going through the motions, running the ranch, trying to be a father. But I've been empty inside. And then you came along, and suddenly I wasn't empty anymore. Suddenly I remembered what it felt like to hope, to feel, to—" his voice cracked, "to love." Sarah's eyes widened. James stepped closer, his hand moving to rest gently on Emma's back, connecting all three of them. "I love you, Sarah Bennett. I love your strength and your fear and your stubborn refusal to give up even when you think you should. I love the way you see people, really see them. And I don't just want you in Emma's life, I want you in mine." The saloon was so quiet you could hear the dust settling. Sarah's tears fell faster now, but her voice was stronger when she spoke. "I'm afraid, James. I'm so afraid of failing, of losing." "Then be afraid with me," James said softly. "Be afraid, but don't run. Stay, fight. Let us be your family." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was watching them both with wide, knowing eyes. Then she looked back at James, and something in her expression shifted, from fear to determination, from doubt to hope. "I don't know if I can—" "You can," James interrupted gently, "because you already have. You've already changed our lives, Sarah. You've already become family. Now just stay." Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. When she opened them again, there was clarity there, decision. "Okay," she whispered. James's heart leaped. "Okay?" Sarah nodded, a trembling smile breaking through her tears. "Okay, I'll stay. I'll try. Her voice broke. "I'll be your family." James reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small velvet box he'd been carrying for 3 days. He'd bought it in town, knowing he might never get the chance to use it, but hoping, desperately hoping, that he would. He pulled it out now, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest by his means, but chosen with care. Sarah's eyes went wide. James dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the Silver Spur Saloon, still supporting Emma in Sarah's arms with one hand. "Sarah Bennett," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room, "will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, then at James, then at Emma cradled in her arms. The whole saloon seemed to hold its breath. Even the old drunk in the corner had stopped mid-sip to watch. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to run, to say no. But then Emma shifted in her arms, and Sarah felt those small fingers tighten around her dress, trusting and certain. This child believed in her. This man believed in her. Maybe it was time she believed in herself. "Yes," Sarah whispered, and then louder, stronger. "Yes, James, I'll marry you." The saloon erupted. Cowboys whooped and hollered. The piano player struck up a jubilant tune, and the bartender started pouring free whiskey. James stood, sliding the ring onto Sarah's finger with trembling hands, then pulled both her and Emma into his arms. Emma, caught between them, made a sound, a small, soft giggle. Both Sarah and James froze, pulling back to look at her. Emma was smiling, really, truly smiling. "Did you hear that?" Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her face. "She laughed, James," she laughed. James felt his own eyes burning. He pressed his forehead against Sarah's, holding them both close. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "All of us." 3 weeks later, they were married in a small ceremony at the ranch. The preacher from Copper Ridge officiated, and a handful of ranch hands and townspeople attended. Sarah wore a simple, cream-colored dress that James had bought her from the general store, the finest thing she'd ever owned. But the most important guest was Emma, sitting in her wheelchair at the front, watching everything with bright, attentive eyes. When James and Sarah exchanged vows, Emma clapped her hands together, another small miracle. That night, after the guests had left and the celebration had died down, Sarah sat beside Emma's bed, just as she had so many nights before. But this time, everything was different. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. This was home. "Ready for bed, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently. Emma looked at her, and then, in a voice so soft and raspy from years of disuse that Sarah almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Mama." Sarah's breath stopped. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears instantly filled her eyes. Emma said it again, clearer this time. "Mama." Sarah couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. All she could do was pull Emma into her arms and hold her, sobbing with joy. James appeared in the doorway, alerted by the sound. "What happened is everything." "She called me Mama," Sarah choked out, looking up at him with wonder. "James, she spoke. She called me Mama." James crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside them, his own eyes wet. "Say it again, sweetheart," he encouraged gently. "Can you say it again?" Emma looked at him, then at Sarah, and smiled. "Mama," she said again. Then turning to James, she added in that same soft voice, "Papa." James let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stayed like that. The 3 of them tangled together, crying and laughing and holding on tight. Over the following months, Emma continued to improve. Her speech came back slowly, a few words at a time. With Sarah's patient guidance, she learned to feed herself, to hold a book, to express her needs and wants. The nightmares faded, replaced by peaceful sleep and, occasionally, happy dreams. But more than that, Emma learned to trust again, to love again, to believe that the world, despite its cruelty, still held good things. And Sarah learned that forgiveness wasn't just something you gave to others. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive was yourself. Caleb's death would always be a scar on her heart, but she'd stopped letting it be a chain. She'd learned that honoring his memory didn't mean punishing herself. It meant helping others, loving fiercely, and choosing hope over fear. One evening, as the sun set over the Nevada mountains, Sarah and James sat on the porch watching Emma play in the yard with one of the ranch dogs. The little girl was laughing, a sound that had become beautifully common as the dog licked her face. "You know what I think?" James said, taking Sarah's hand. "What's that?" "I think Caleb would be proud of you," James said softly. "I think he'd be glad you found your way back to this, to helping, to loving, to living." Sarah's eyes misted, but she smiled. "I think Rebecca would be proud of you too, of how you learned to let someone in again." James squeezed her hand. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Sarah looked at Emma, then back at James. "No," she said gently, "she saved us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, as the sky turned gold and crimson. Three broken people who had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful from the pieces. A family, not bound by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. And as Emma ran toward them, her arms outstretched and her laughter ringing through the evening air, Sarah realized something profound. Sometimes the family you choose is even stronger than the one you're born into. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't protecting your heart, it's opening it again, even when you're terrified of what you might lose. Because love, real love, is always worth the risk. Love isn't just about finding someone, it's about choosing them, even when you're afraid. James spent years believing love was something he'd lost forever. Sarah spent just as long convincing herself that caring meant inevitable pain. But together, with Emma as their bridge, they learned that family isn't defined by perfection. It's built through sacrifice, trust, and the courage to try again. Because sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected. And the families we build from broken pieces become the strongest ones of all.